Organizational Behavior, Chapter 8, Learning and Decision Making. Class agenda, learning and decision making. Why do some employees learn to make decisions better than others? Types of knowledge, methods of learning, methods of decision making problems. How important is learning? Application and training. So here again, we have the integrative model of behavior that we've had in previous chapters. Learning and decision making. Learning reflects relatively permanent changes in an employee's knowledge or skill that result from experience. Decision making. So when you look at learning, when they look at permanent changes in employees' knowledge and skill results from experience. So the things that go into it, this is a process to get somebody from A to B, and they stay there because they've learned. And then we're going to discuss the different things that they in the learning process that got them from A to B. But that's learning. Decision making refers to the process of generating and choosing from a set of alternatives to solve a problem. So realistically, when you're making decisions, you got to look at a situation where you got multiple things going on, and you got to figure out, make a good decision from that information, from all these things that are going on. Workplace learning potential stuff. So here we have a chart. 1 strongly disagree, 5 strongly agree. Average score is 19. Why do some employees learn to make better decisions than others? Expertise refers to the knowledge and skills that distinguish experts from novice and less experienced people. Employees learn through 2 types. Explicit is easy to communicate and teach, and tacit is more difficult and communicate, gained with experience. So realistically, I'll make it simple. If you think in terms of explicit learning, this is something where you're reading. Like, just consider reading to learn. Tacit, you're actually doing. That's the difference. So what you find a lot of times, you do the explicit first, the reading, then you do the tacit, the actual task at hand. And Tenet is a movie. It's a sci-fi movie, and it's a very strange sci-fi movie. And as a matter of fact, I'm not even going to try to talk to you about this, to explain this movie to you. If you go and look, you see that there's a lot of folks, there's a lot of blogs and a lot of stuff, internet chatter about this movie, about what it meant, what people thought about it, whatever else. But it is very far out there. And so for people who are into sci-fi, this would be something to take a look at. Characteristics of explicit and tacit knowledge. Explicit knowledge, as you can see over here, easily transferred through written or verbal communication. Remember I said reading is learned through books and things like that. General tacit knowledge, very difficult. It's impossible to articulate to others. Highly personal in nature, based on experience. So this is, again, something somebody will require by doing. So if you take somebody who's done something for 6 months and somebody else who's done the same thing for 6 years, you see the tacit knowledge is going to be vastly different. Methods of learning. How do employees learn? Reinforcement. You've always heard about reinforcement. And when you've heard about it, it's usually positive and negative reinforcements, which you most commonly hear about. But reinforcement is known as an operative conditioning. We learn by observing the link between our voluntary behavior and the consequences that follow. So that positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, we'll talk about that a little bit more. But when you look at that, this is actually a conditioning, a state of being at some point because of things that's happening. Operative conditioning components: antecedent, behavior, and consequence. So look at the antecedent, condition that precedes the behavior. So this is at the beginning, and here's some examples. The manager sets specific and difficult goal. Behavior: the employee meets assigned goal. The consequence: the employee receives a bonus. That is the process right there when you think about it. And a lot of times this is applicable to most of us. Manager sets a goal, a company sets a goal. Employee does the task to meet that goal. And the employee gets paid or receives a bonus as a result. Contingencies of reinforcement. So when we think about the contingency of reinforcement, increase desired behaviors, and the goal is to increase desired behaviors and decrease unwanted behavior. So we look at positive reinforcement. Positive outcome follows a desired behavior. So you do something that I say, I'm the manager and I say is good. As a result, something follows that behavior, a positive outcome. You get some type of reward, attaboard, recognition, or whatever else. Negative reinforcement is an unwanted outcome is removed from a desired behavior. For instance, you actually did something I wanted you to do, but you got a bad result. So when I'm looking at negative reinforcement, I'm trying to work with you to get you to do the want, to get this reversed so that we get a wanted, desired behavior outcome from a wanted behavior. So from a desired behavior. So punishment, an unwanted outcome from an unwanted behavior. So that means you did something wrong. The bottom line, or somebody did something wrong, and the bottom line is it ended up bad. So it started realistically. Again, you can't start off from a negative to end up with a positive. So it was started wrong and it ended up. And this is a lot of times somebody did something that they know they shouldn't have done, and realistically ended up with a bad, unwanted behavior. And when we look at the extinction, it's the removal of a consequence following behavior. So if, say for instance, if you have someone that he's a good worker, but he slacks off every time a certain group comes over there. Well, you know what? After I've observed that as a manager a few times, I'm going to say, you know what? He's a good worker till that group shows up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop that group from being able to come over there. I'm going to take away the distraction for him. So I'm going to, the removal of the consequence following the unwanted behavior. It's that consequence that caused the unwanted behavior. So contingency for reinforcement. So look at here. We see consequence is added, consequence is removed. The extinction, remember I gave you the example of the good worker and the group that would come by over there and he would stop working. So you move that, you look at that. You see consequences added, wanted outcome, positive, unwanted outcome is punishment. On consequence, extinction, once you remove that problem, now you see there you have a situation where there be negative reinforcement, but you can actually go and work with this right here because the goal is to change that behavior. So what is it I have to do? It's like, well, if you know that if you do this, then you know this happens to you. Well, at that point, that's when that's the negative reinforcement. If I do this, I know I'm gonna get some type of punishment or this is gonna hurt. Now, if you do unwanted behavior and get an unwanted outcome, we know that comes. But the thing about it is that started negative. Negative reinforcement starts when you started positive but ended up with a negative. Schedules of reinforcement. Reinforcement schedule. So if we look at that and we see the reward given following, potential level of performance, and example. So I won't read through all of this, but I want you to pause it and go through and read through those because it's self-explanatory. And but I'll give you an example, like for instance, variable interval. And I'll talk about that one because you see a variable interval, just variable time periods, moderately high, the potential level for performance. And it says supervisor walk by. Well, the example is this. It's not the supervisor walks by one time. What that's saying is he walks by at different times and you don't never know when they are. So that's variable right there. So when we see something along the lines of a variable ratio, this is when you might have your salespeople. They get paid on a commission. Well, they don't ever know what the commission is going to be. So that's a variable ratio. If you look at fixed ratio, this is where if you had somebody that was working and they were making, and they were on quotas. So they know if they make so many widgets, they get so much money. So that's a piece rate for pay right there. So that's why I explained those, because those are different. And some of the, you're very familiar with some of that, but you just didn't know what it was called. Methods of learning. How do employees learn? Reinforcement, observation. So social learning theory argues that people and organizations have the ability to learn through observation of others. So realistic, what they're trying to hear is, because someone gets to see another person or persons doing something, then they're learning by watching them do it. Most people are visual learners. So they need to see something versus you just tell it to them. This is what social learning theory argues. Like, if they can see it, then they can learn it. Behavioral modeling involves observation and learning from others and then repeating action. So this is the second part of that. This is where, now that you've watched it and you've observed some other people do it, now you have to repeat it. Can you do it and be competent at it? That's the behavioral model. So the modeling process, you have intentional, retention, production, and reinforcement. So if we look at the first process, attentional, we learn it. Learning focuses attention on the critical behaviors exhibited by the model. So this is where they're paying attention to kind of what's going on. The retention, learner must remember. This is retaining it. Production, this is actually doing it. Have the appropriate skill to be able to do it. And reinforcement is the learner must view the model, receiving reinforcement for behavior, and then receive it themselves. So reinforce the learning, reinforce the behavior. What is it we need to do that? And then that's when somebody says, okay, now I have it. So this is the modeling process. So you see the process that someone would go through. Methods of learning. Some people learn differently as they function of the goals and activities that they prioritize. Goal orientation. Now, learning orientation. Building competence is deemed more important than demonstrating the competence. I'll simplify this. I'm going to tell you what a lot of times this is referred to as with somebody. This is when, if somebody's like this and they're kind of geared that way, a lot of times people refer to them as process oriented, not results oriented. They're more concerned about the process that they go through than they are about the result that they're supposed to get. Now, when you take someone who's process oriented like that and you put them with somebody who's goal oriented, totally opposites. These two people would not get along. In the real world, sometimes this happens, and let's just say you have a process-oriented manager, a learning orientation process-oriented manager, but you are a results-oriented individual. I can tell you right now that that's going to be some issues right there, because the manager is going to a lot of times think that you're cutting corners when you found ways to do things more efficient, because he's really about the process. So what he'll tell you is you need to do these 10 steps to make sure you get it right. And then what you would articulate to him is like, well, I can actually get that right in 7 steps. We don't need to do the additional 3 because you're results oriented. Learning orientation and process driven people see it differently. Performance proof orientation. Focus is on demonstrating competence so that others think favorably of you. So this is people who say, you know what? I'm going to perform at a high level and I'm going to get results and stuff because I want people to think that, you know, I'm a superstar. That motivates somebody so they do good because they want to impress upon folks that they are a superstar. And I'm doing this as a result of, you know, my performance and stuff. I'll work 2 hours over, you know, every day if I have to. But bottom line is they want people to view them favorably. Performance avoid orientation. Focus on demonstrating competence so that others will not think poorly of you. So realistically, these people are kind of, you've heard this before, they're kind of motivated. They're kind of motivated to succeed by the fear of failing. They don't want to fail. So that keeps them going. And that's why they succeed. So other people won't see them as a failure. I can tell you that a lot of times when I've seen this with people, they don't enjoy success as much as the other group, the people who perform at a high level and their results oriented, because They don't get a good feeling from what they're doing. Remember, they're doing this almost out of a bad disposition. I don't want people to think bad of me, so this is why I'm doing it. It's not their motivation that they want to succeed. I don't want you to think bad of me is why I'm succeeding. So sometimes they don't enjoy success as much as some others do. So here's another example of a chart for goal orientation. 1, strongly disagree, 5, strongly agree. So you can take that and see where you come out. Methods of decision making, program decisions, automatic decisions, because knowledge allows employees to recognize the situation needed a course of action. So program decisions comes with experience. You've done something enough. Somebody's done something enough that they understand when this happens, I know exactly what to do. See, I'm programmed to do that. Intuition is basically off emotion. This is how I feel. I feel like I should do this. And they operate off it and they drive. You've heard some people refer to it as a gut instinct. Crisis situations are an urgent problem that must be addressed immediately. Those are things that actually are external to a person, possibly even to a company, but it's a situation that arises that cannot be put off. For instance, if this was a production company, I'll give you an example. A crisis situation would be a conveyor belt breaks. You got to do that's urgent. You got to fix it right because that affects productivity. Productivity affects what? Profit. You have to address it right away. If it was law enforcement, a school shooting, that's a crisis situation. It has to be addressed immediately. If it was at a hospital emergency room, a heart attack, that's a crisis situation versus somebody who comes in and they just broke their ankle. Non-program decisions, these are new, complex, and unrecognized problems. And for non-program decisions, the rationale decision model offers a step-by-step approach to making decisions. It's designed to maximize outcomes by examine all available alternatives. So when you have the non-program decision, these are things that you're not used to. So you can't use a program decision-making process for that because either it's new to you, so therefore you don't have the knowledge or experience to know how to deal with it. Now you have to go through a rational process to try to determine how do I come up with this and come up with the best option to deal with this situation. So when we look at program and non-program decisions. So first of all, we got a problem at the top. Is there a problem recognized? Has it been dealt with before? So if we go to the left and we look at the green, this is where program comes in. Yes, I recognize this problem. I've dealt with it before. So what do? They implement an appropriate solution. And does this solution deliver the expected outcome? Yes, it does. Right there in the blue, we see. So if we go back up to the problem, identify a problem. Is there a problem recognized and has it been dealt with before? Let's go to the right. Now we're looking at non-program. And the answer to this question is no. I don't recognize this problem and it has not been dealt with before. Now you have to go through a different process. Now you have to go through a process of trying to come up with a solution, to try to go through a process to come up with the best solution or answer to your problem. And notice the steps that you go through to get through it. Now, realistically, by the time you go through all those steps, as a working professional and being competent at your job, you should come up to the conclusion at the very end down there, the answer would be yes. Now you notice how much longer it takes, how many more steps you got to go through versus on the program decision-making side. It's because you did on the one side, the left side, the program side, you knew what you were dealing with. On the right side, the non-program decision-making, you had no clue what you were dealing with. You had to go through and ascertain and come up with alternatives and pick the best solution for the issue. Here's the chart for you, rational decision-making. 1, strongly disagree, 5, strongly agree. You can take that to see how you fare on that. Decision-making problems, limited information, bounded rationality. You know, this is when you do not have the ability or resources to process all information and all process information and alternatives. Now, with that, this basically means sometimes you've heard this, somebody who's shooting from the hip or he's operating off his gut instinct. It means you don't have enough information to make a good decision or to come up with an alternative. And if you do make one prematurely, there's a high probability you're going to get a bad result to a very bad result. Listen to this. You cannot make a sound decision off partial information. And that's what that is right there. You don't have all the information. It's not available to you. It doesn't mean that you've been negligent in your job. It just means that you don't have all the information you need. So now you have to go and try to get that information and come up with some type of alternative. Satisficing, choosing the first exceptional alternative. This is when someone goes through that process and they come up with something and say, oh, I got it. The very first thing they came up with might not be the best thing to come up with, but it was a quick answer. There are people that will do that. It's like, well, I had to go through this and I came up with the answer and stuff. It's like, really? It's like, well, came up with it kind of quick. Yeah, because they didn't go through a whole process to say, well, what could the alternatives be? What could the pros and cons be to this? If they did that, they might say, you know what? This first thing I came up with might not be a good thing. It might not be the best thing. Not that it's bad, but it may not be the best thing. So rational decision-making versus bounded rationality. So if we look at rational decision-making here over here to the left, identify the problem by thoroughly examining the situation, considering all interested parties, develop an exhaustive list of alternatives to consider as solutions, evaluate all the alternatives simultaneously, use accurate information to evaluate alternatives, pick the alternative that maximizes the value. That's a long way of saying what I just said on the previous slide. Bounded rationale says we are likely to boil down the problem to something that is easily understood, come up with a few solutions that tend to be straightforward, familiar, and similar to what is currently being done, evaluate each alternative as soon as we think of it, use distorted or inaccurate information or partial information during the evaluation process, pick the first acceptable alternative. And see, that's when you get in satisfice. This is where you don't want to be. That is when somebody's like, well, I went through the process, I came up with something, but it didn't work. It was because realistically, it was a flawed process you went through. That's why. Decision-making problems, faulty perceptions, selective perception. This is when we have a tendency to see the environment only as it affects them, consistent with their expectations. So realistically, this is where selective perception is when I see things through my eyes, how I think they should be, how they relate to me. Maybe not the customer. Maybe not the group of people who are doing the work. Projection bias is belief that others think and feel and act the same way they do. This is when you look at projection bias and say, well, if I think this way, they do too. If I think this way, somebody else would do it too. Well, guess what? There's a high probability they won't, because they're different than you. We see things different, we do things different, and we believe, we think different. Social identity theory. People identify with groups and judge others by their group memberships. This is when you look at it and you say, you know what? These group of people over here, as a result of what they do, they're all the same. But that's a whole group of people that might be doing a job over there, but you look at them all the same. Well, they're not the same, they're different people. And the reason you said they were all the same is because they all were doing the same job. Basically, they got their own membership because they were on the same team doing the same stuff. So you said they all are kind of doing something screwed up, when realistically it may be two of them. Stereotype. Assumptions made about others on the basis of their membership in a social group. This is where you hear a lot of times when people use negative stereotypes about people, who they are, where they're from. There could be their race, gender, ethnicity. It could be, I've actually known this before, stereotypes. I've known people said that you know what, I would never date someone who's been in the military based on a stereotype, you know, and any number of things. So you see this people who belong to a social group, but you can see that in all different types of capacities. Or here's another way too. I would never date anybody or trust anybody who belongs to this religion. That's a stereotype. And usually when you see stereotypes, I've never known that to be used in a positive way. That's usually negative. When someone's been stereotyped, that's usually negative. Heuristics. So this is simple, efficient rules of thumb that allow us to make decisions more easily. It's kind of like this. What under normal circumstances, what would happen right here? And then you ask me and I tell you. I'm like, okay, that's kind of like the rule of thumb. So I'm saying, okay, well, if it's a chance that this normally happens this way, well, let's go ahead and do it this way, because that's probably what's going to happen. Availability bias, tendency to base judgments on information that is easy to recall. So if you're having a situation where it has a lot of moving parts and a lot of details and a lot of data, and you make this decision based upon the stuff that you can remember, that's an issue. One of the things I can tell you is this, is when you're dealing with something that's complex, has a lot of moving parts, a lot of data, you can't remember everything. One of the ways when people make this mistake, one of the mistakes that they make is things are not written down. They're trying to go by memory. And that can get you into trouble when you have a lot to remember. That's when you get to an availability bias. Decision-making biases. So as you can see, we have several decision-making biases here. We have on this slide right here, as you look at anchoring, framing, representative, contrast, recency, and ratio bias effect. I will let you read through those individually. They are self-explanatory. Decision-making problems, faulty attributions. Fundamental attribution error, a tendency to judge others' behaviors as due to internal factors such as ability or attitude. So we look at self-serving bias, attribute our failures to external factors and our successes. So let's look at the fundamental attribution error. So this is when you can look at someone and say, well, you know what, there's a reason that this person can't make it. It says, you know what, he's young. And young people don't know what to do now. Young people are kind of lazy. They don't have good work ethic. So that's what I'm saying right there. The young people don't know enough to do this. So realistically, he's looking at internal factors and he's using his age against it, when it may not have anything to do with his age. It may have everything to do with his aptitude. Self-serving bias, attribute our failures to external factors and successes to internal factors. So in other words, if I fail, it's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. And it's not mine. Oh no. I can find somebody to blame, but it ain't my fault. It'll be somebody else's fault. It'll be the equipment, it'll be somebody else, but it's not mine. But now if I succeed, it's always going to be me. So I am going to take credit for that. That's on me. But I'm always going to try to find a way to deflect the failures to somebody else or to something else. Attribution process, consensus. Did others act the same way under similar circumstances? So when you look at that, if you have a situation where you want to know is like, hey, Mary did this and this is the result we got and stuff. And you're like, I don't think that's a good result. Let me ask you, we've had other people to do this. What kind of result did they get? You've watched other people do this. What kind of result did they get? And then the person tells you, yeah, I've seen several people do this and they got the same result she got. So she's not doing something wrong. She wasn't deficient. Y'all have something that's systemically wrong now. But by asking that question to find out how did other people do in that situation, you found out they did it very similar as she did. So it wasn't anything negligent on her part. Distinctiveness. Do these people tend to act differently in other circumstances? So if you look at people in other circumstances, like, you know what, they do good. Mac does good when he's doing this, but Mac does not do good when he's doing that. So he has a tendency to act different when he's when he's doing these two different tasks. One he excels at, the other he does not, and that's an issue. If actually Mac is supposed to do both of those duties, and a lot of times this boils down to they do well on the things they like, they don't do well on the things they don't like. Consistency. Do these people always do this when performing this task? So now if you've tried to figure out something works and you see somebody that gets it to work, Now you want to know, is this something that's repeatable? Can we be consistent with this? Do these people always do this when they're performing this task? If they do, you know now this, you can say legitimately, this is how this works. If you wanted to take a step further, you can say, okay, do these people always do that? Like, yes, they do. They consistently do this. Then you can say, I'm going to take it a step further. I want to see if another group can do it too. Can it be repeated by another group of people? And can they be consistent with it as well? And if so, now I'm really confident to say, this is how this works. And when we work it this way, this is the outcome we get. So we look at the consensus, distinctiveness, and consistency. So we look up here, behavior observed. Remember I said most people learn by watching. So if we look to the left, we see internal attribution. Internal attribution, again, this a lot of times is how we think or how we feel. Individual factors such as the ability and motivation or attitudes are to blame. It's something with that person that's not quite right. That's internal. There's something going on with them. It's not the equipment. It's not the job. It's not the process, but it's something going on internal with this person. When you look at the opposite side, external attribution, now you're looking at things that we're going, okay, we got the same problem, but it's not the person. It's the process that's screwed up, or it's the equipment that's antiquated and old, or it's something else that's going on with the computer software, but it's not the person. So it wouldn't be that. So we look at that, when you see consensus over here, you see on one side, you see for internal consensus, internal attribution, you see consensus is low. You see distinctiveness is low, but you see consistency is high. On the opposite side, you see external attribution. It's going to be high, high, and low. When you look at those, how they tie into those. Decision-making problems, escalation of commitment. Decision to continue to follow a failing course of action. We've heard this before, throwing good money after bad. Become stronger when decision makers have invested a lot of money in a decision and when the project is questioned seems quite close to completion. So this decision to continue following a failing course of action. You will see this. When you see this, I can tell you, I'll give you an example when I've seen this happen in real life. A lot of times when I've seen this happen in real life, it's because the person who's actually making the decision, it is their project or their baby. They came up with the idea. So they basically want to ride or die with it. When other people are saying, hey, this is probably not a good idea. There's one that jumps in my mind very vividly, and this is exactly what happened. When a lot of money and time had been spent and the results were not there, this person still wanted to go and go and go and go and go. And management's looking at it saying, hey, we don't think this is a good idea. But there was something very interesting that happened. In that particular instance with this individual, they had gone so long and trusted him and followed his lead so long and kept believing in him so long. They spent so much money, they felt like they'd gone too far and they couldn't stop it because they had to try to finish it. And when they did, they got a subpar result. So that's exactly what escalation, the decision to continue following a failing course of action can be. At some point in time, you have to say, I have to cut my losses. If it's better to say that than to continue to throw good money after bad. Why do some employees learn to make decisions better than others? It's because some of them go through a process that's better than their counterparts. So if we look here, we look at reinforcement, observation, and goal orientation. And we come down to the explicit knowledge, which I said was the reading, the tacit knowledge, which I said is the doing. And between those two, you get expertise. Remember I said a lot of times explicit knowledge comes first, then the tacit knowledge comes. Subsequently, then you get the expertise. Okay, so now you go down to, and you encounter a situation, you're dealing with something that's programmed and something non-programmed. So when it's programmed, you can make a decision with accuracy, you can come up with a plan, knock it out. When it's non-programmed, you got to come up with some decision and you got to go through a process to try to come up with something to get some accuracy so you may draw a conclusion. When you look at the non-program decision-making problems associated with that, that can hamper that, limited information. Remember I said, you can't make a good decision with partial or no information. Faulty perceptions. If someone is actually has a perception or belief that something is this way and it's not, or it will work this way and it won't, you're starting from a negative, because you have to make ground for that, because it's not reality. Faulty attributions. And then you have escalation of commitment. So all those things factor into that. When you look at it, it's like, you know what? They can hamper that process and slow that down. How important is learning? Learning is mildly correlated with task performance. Learning is less correlated to citizenship behavior and counterproductive behavior. Learning is weakly related to organizational commitment. Higher levels of job knowledge is associated with slight increase in emotional attachment. Employees with higher levels of expertise may become more highly valued commodities on the job, thereby reducing their levels of continuous commitment. Self-explanatory with this. Now, when we look here, we see what it's talking about. With the learning and job performance, you see we have a moderate correlation there with the yellow. Learning and organizational commitment, it represents a weak correlation. Application training, knowledge transfer from more experienced to less experienced employees. So you have behavior modeling, company messaging system, and social networking. Communities of practice involve informal social networking, social learning through extended periods of employee interaction. So when you look at that, you're talking about behavior model, where you actually have people who are watching others to learn. Company messaging systems and social networking utilized to get to transfer knowledge. Is how do you when you train folks, you're getting them information, you're sending messages through systems, you have social networking, whatever it may be. Because now it's a lot of times you have somebody working with them to try to help them. Communities of practice involve informal social learning through extended periods of employee interaction. So now you've got a group of people going through training together. And you've got probably a group of people that's working with them to train them. And there is your community. And what they do is they learn from each other and they help each other as they go and grow into the position. Transfer training. Climate for transfer involves an environment that supports the use of new skills. So now when you look at the transfer training, you have to look at this. Did I actually give these people the skills that they need to do the job? These new skills, and not only do I help them get the skills, do I provide them the support they need so that they can actually reinforce that learning and they can actually utilize the skills. This is a transfer of training. It's a process too. It's not a one-step deal. It's a multiple process when you do that. And people who are actually trainers, professional trainers, and work in learning and development, they really understand that really well about, I just don't want them to I just don't want to give them something and tell them, okay, now push them out of the nest and tell them to fly. I want to give you something. I want to work with you and help you to understand it. I want to watch you do it. And then I'm going to support you until you get really good and experienced at it. That completes chapter 8.